Scottish cryptids include well-known mythical beings like the Lochness monster and the Kelpies, as well as many other lesser-known figures from folklore, such as the Wolver, a man with a wolf's head, the Selkie, a seal that can become a human, and the Bealban Sith, a seductive vampire-like being. Other creatures include the Blue Men of the Minch, the Bean Neeg, a death omen, and the large mountain-dwelling Grey Man of Ben Macdui. And now, after hearing that, there's two things you should know before we dive into more depth on these strange creatures. Number one, I'm English, so my pronunciations of Scottish names and places is not very good, even though I've been living here since 2012. And number two, in previous years I have made some very short videos on specific cryptids or lists of cryptids, but I've never gone into them in as much detail as I'd like. Now that I have over 4,000 subscribers, I want to take you into more Scottish folklore, social history and legends. For this video, I'll be talking about 3 cryptids that are all linked to the sea: Selkies, Kelpies, and the mysterious Blue Men of the Minch. I first encountered the idea of the Selkie when I played an old computer game called Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles in about 2004 on the GameCube. You may think that being part of the British Isles, we've all heard of each other's myths and legends, but I had never heard of these strange and interesting creatures before. The Selkie race in the computer game were humanoid and had silky grey hair. They wore animal skins and very little clothing. They were one of the most agile characters, and in some instances you could use paddles or boat oars with them as weapons. None of these references meant anything to me, as I just assumed they were a fantasy race created for the game, just like all the others. Then, when I moved to Scotland in 2012, my boyfriend's niece was still a toddler, and I came across a picture book called The Selkie Girl by Janice Mackay. It was only then, a whole decade later, that I realised the mysterious Selkie was actually a strong figure in Scottish folklore. For a brief time a couple of years ago, I also hosted a writers group at my local community hub, and my co-host had written a modern Selkie short story which I'd love to share with you at a later date on this channel. So, now that you know my background, what exactly is a Selkie, and how did the legend become so entrenched in all areas of Scotland, even the landlocked ones like Cumbernauld? Whilst researching this cryptid, I was very interested to see that it's not just isolated to Scottish beliefs. A Selkie is a mythological shape-shifting creature from Scottish, Irish and Icelandic folklore that can transform between a seal and a human by shedding and then wearing their seal skin again. Selkies are known for their captivating beauty and sometimes a melancholy nature. Many stories feature a Selkie being tricked into marrying a human by having their skin stolen, but they are forever drawn to the sea and will eventually try to return to their true form and their watery home. If we look at the geographical region of the map where their tales are told, there are 2 main types of seal that live in the waters, but up to 6 different types are known to visit the area. These include sightings of the large hooded seal. The males of this species blow air into giant pink skin sacs on the top of their heads to display dominance and virility. It's a very strange thing to see. The Selkie is considered to fall into the shapeshifter category of cryptids because it's neither human nor a seal. Without their animal skin, they are trapped in human form and are often depicted as being powerful and graceful on the land. In their human form, Selkies are described as incredibly beautiful, kind and loving creatures. But despite their love for humans, a deep longing for the sea always calls them back to their underwater life, often leading to sadness and yearning for their true home. But why do so many cultures believe that Selkies exist or used to exist? There are 2 main theories that seem plausible. However, in the modern world, these are widely debunked by science and the fact that the populations in many countries now have access to a higher level of education compared to all those centuries ago. Firstly, when the seal populations were larger, it was more common to find decomposing bodies of seals on the beach. At a certain stage, the skin sloughs off, revealing the rotting muscles underneath, until eventually a skeleton and parts of the seal skin are all that's left on display. Coming across one of these bodies must have been quite unnerving, because the structures of the seal's flippers and its torso can seem almost human. Dr. Julie Bond from the University of Bradford has theorised that this made the idea of seals slipping out of their skins when they left the sea appear to be more plausible to our ancestors and added weight to the legends. Secondly, the seal's behaviour in the sea, especially at a distance, can easily be mistaken for that of a human. Have you ever looked out to sea and noticed a dark head bobbing about in the water? Are those the head and shoulders of a swimmer taking a rest, or is that a child playing in the water close to the rocky beach? I even have a true story submitted to my book, Are You Sure That's What You Saw?, where a lady in Norfolk was experiencing a migraine and believed she saw a human out on a buoy who needed to be rescued. The word Selkie is a diminutive of a Scots word selch or selk, meaning seal. The stories that have endured for generations often follow the same narrative. This could also be another reason why Scottish people have the idea so firmly imprinted on their culture. It's the same way that urban legends persist, the oral history being repeated around the fireside for centuries until it becomes a firm truth. The usual narrative is that a Selkie will come to shore and hide their skin, then mingle among the local humans. At some point, they fall in love or get distracted by some aspect of the human social life. While they're enjoying being in their human form, their seal skin is found by someone and either kept so the Selkie must stay there captive on land, or accidentally taken, thinking it to just be an ordinary seal skin. After some time, the Selkie often finds their lost skin or negotiates the return of their skin after becoming very melancholy. They pine for the sea and their old life, and then, inevitably, they return to the water, leaving their human family behind. At the end of these stories, the Selkie is often seen bobbing in the sea and watching their loved ones playing on the beach from a long distance. Did you know that the oldest recorded Selkie story is actually from Iceland? In 1641, Jon Gudmundsson Lerdi wrote a collection of stories called Summaries of Understanding the Edda. The story features a man who steals a Selkie's skin, forcing her to remain in human form and marry him. While these intriguing creatures don't appear to have malevolent undertones, it's said that the folk tales could be used as a warning for people not to marry outside of their own clans or tribes, because it leads to sadness and loss for both parties. Unlike the peaceful and aloof Selkies, a Kelpie is a dangerous, shape-shifting water spirit from Scottish folklore that often appears as a white horse to lure victims into a deep body of water, leading them to a very wet and dark grave. It can also take on a human form, but may retain a telltale feature like seaweed in its hair or a physical trait such as hooves indicating its true nature. I had kind of heard of Kelpies before, because in England, when we see rough ocean waves, we often say there are white horses riding them, which refers to the white foaming tops as they're churned up by the wind and underwater currents. The more specific myth of horses luring people to their death is a localised tale to Scotland. The most famous narrative involves the blacksmith of Barra, where a Kelpie is captured and forced to serve for him for a year, but it ultimately escapes and curses the whole blacksmith's family. Another tale describes how a Kelpie, who had transformed into a man, is forced by a laird to carry stones for his castle, leading to the Laird of Morphy's family extinction after the Kelpie is released. So far, this sounds a little similar to the Selkie tales. However, the Kelpies' dark warnings to children and young adults about entering dangerous pools of water couldn't be more chilling, as you're about to hear. It is told that Kelpies appear as beautiful, strong white or grey horses standing in deep waters. They tempt people in to come and catch them. You can imagine that in ancient history, to find a strong wild horse resting and drinking in the water must have seemed like a dream come true. You could tame it, take it home and increase your family's wealth. But when that person enters the water and touches its skin, the Kelpie is covered with a substance so sticky that once the person climbs on to ride, they are stuck forever and dragged down, down, down under the water. Then, once the victim is on their back, the Kelpie drowns them and eats them. Sometimes the human's guts are the only thing to float back to the shore. So, as modern humans, we can understand the allegorical elements of the folktale. If you enter a dangerous deep stretch of water because you're tempted to swim or fish, especially if you're alone, you could come to harm and even drown to death. But did you know these tales are also older than the Lochness monster and possibly even older than Selkies? It's possible that we have evidence of the water horses being carved into monuments in the 7th century, and even Robert Burns mentions them in his poem, Addressed to the Dale, in 1786. When thou's dissolve the snowy hoard, and float the jingling icy board, then water Kelpies haunt the ford by your direction, and nighted travellers are allured to their destruction. Even J.K. Rowling of Harry Potter fame mentions them in her Fantastic Beasts series. More recently, in 2014, the 2 Kelpies statues were erected about 20 minutes from me along the road, next to the canal in Falkirk. At 30 metres high, the Kelpies is the largest equine sculpture in the world. The 2 steel horse heads rear up by the Forth and Clyde Canal at the Helix Park. They're a popular tourist attraction, and I even completed the 5k charity event running round them at night, where the giant colourful lights could be seen from the motorway. So you might be asking, why have this giant statue of 2 famously evil cryptids? Well, Kelpies do represent strength, because if you can catch a Kelpie in its horse form using a special magic bridle, then the beast will be able to haul massive loads or carry passengers long distances through the water. And finally for this episode, we come to the Blue Men of the Minch. Now, this is a very specific type of cryptid, and recently there have been several theories surrounding what the origin of the legend could be. Let me first tell you about the folklore, then we can look at the possible social, real-world events behind it. As the name suggests, the Blue Men of the Minch, also known as storm Kelpies, are mythological creatures inhabiting the stretch of water between the northern Outer Hebrides and mainland Scotland. They're looking for sailors to drown and stricken boats to sink. You will often find that folk tales which are tied to just one specific location do have a grain of truth in them. For example, it's now believed that Nessie is not a sea monster, but may be part of an older species of shark rising to the surface, or even the penis of a whale or another sea creature that has ventured into the deepest part of the loch. That's why I find these blue men so intriguing. I was recently at Blackness Castle where they had a Scottish folklore exhibition, which also mentioned these cryptids. The legend goes that apart from their blue colour, the mythical creatures look very much like humans, and they're about the same size. They apparently have the power to create storms, but when the weather's fine, they float, sleeping on or just below the surface of the water. The blue men swim with their torsos raised out of the sea, twisting and diving like porpoises do. Again, here we see some similarities with the Selkies. The blue men are able to speak, and when a group approaches a ship, its chief may shout 2 lines of poetry to the master of the vessel and challenge him to complete the verse. If the skipper fails in that task, then the blue men will attempt to capsize his ship. This fascinates me, because rarely do cryptids speak, and it also makes sense when you hear the theories of the blue men's origin. The main theory that I'm inclined to believe is that many centuries ago, the native people, now let's not go into that debate right now, the native people of Scotland, the Picts, named the painted ones by the Romans, were the namesake of these blue men. This is because it's officially recorded that they used a plant-based substance called woad to paint themselves blue for battle and ritualistic purposes. But it's also been mentioned that they were possibly tattooed in a more permanent way with mineral pigments. This would make more sense because the theory goes that these Picts used to sail in groups in small boats like kayaks, and when they were rowing out at sea, in the straits between the Inner Hebrides and the Outer Hebrides, you could just see their torsos almost floating above the waterline, and their blue paint made them blend in with the seascape. If this were true, then the likelihood that they would set a challenge like pirates to another vessel, then board it and ransack it if the captain failed, is also plausible. It's a good way to find out whether a boat is friend or foe. If you recite one of your own native poems and the captain or skipper can't respond correctly, it's likely he's not of your tribe and therefore poses a potential threat. You have to remember that this legend comes from a time when the Romans and other tribes were starting to conquer the land that we now call Scotland, so there would have been a lot of social upheaval. Another widely believed theory is that after the Romans had invaded Britain and left their mark, Viking hordes who had kidnapped people from North Africa carried them on ships as slaves around the Hebrides and other Scottish islands. These dark-skinned slaves and their masters spent their winters close to the Shanty Isles in the Minch. An extra part to this Viking slave theory is that the slaves were sometimes left on islands in the Minch to starve to death, and these men, with coloured skin and seen from a distance, could be perceived as dark blue rather than black. Again, if you were a desperate slave, you wouldn't think twice about trying to call out to a ship or swimming out to a boat if you believed it was your only salvation. So, whether the blue men were a legendary race of cryptids, or whether it's the remains of a long oral history passed down in the Hebrides, which has become a myth, these blue sea folk joined the ranks of Scottish cryptids associated with large bodies of water. I'll be periodically updating the channel with more cryptid and folklore legends, especially from my area, which is the lowlands of Scotland in Lanarkshire. So, if you like this kind of content, please consider subscribing. And as always, stay curious.